Well, good morning. You wouldn't know it's the week of 4th of July from the great crowd that we have here. I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here at CSIS. And along with our partners at the U.S. Naval Institute, I'm pleased to have you here for our Maritime Security Dialogue. And today we are featuring a discussion on the future of submarine warfare. Before we begin our event, I do want to remind everyone of the safety procedures we have here at CSIS. There are doors behind me on the left and right, and of course the glass doors behind you. Should a fire alarm or something be pulled, I can direct you on which way we are going to go, and we'll exit the building. And we have locations behind us and in front of the building where we can gather. This series, the Maritime Security Dialogue that CSIS and USNI put together, is intended to highlight the particular challenges that are faced by the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard going forward into the future, and to look at them all the way from the national level of maritime policy to naval concept development and program design. We're very proud of this series, and we are very thankful to our sponsors for it, which are Lockheed Martin and Huntington Ingalls Industries. Today, we are focusing on something very close to my heart, as I was relaying to Admiral Richard. I'm a child of the submarine force, so while I know the bases and facilities of the U.S. attack submarine force very well, I hope today that we can have a higher level discussion on the future of submarine warfare and what it brings to the nation as one of our asymmetric advantages. To join us for this conversation, I have to my immediate left Rear Admiral Charles Richard, who is the director of the Undersea Warfare Division for the CNO staff, that's N97. And to his left, I have Rear Admiral Michael Jabaley, who is the Program Executive Officer for Submarines. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Admiral Richard providing some comments, and then Admiral Jabaley, and then we'll open it up to a broader conversation. So let me turn it over to you, Admiral.
Dr. Hicks, thank you so very much for having Michael and I here today. Thanks to CSIS and Naval Institute for sponsoring this and giving us this opportunity. I just couldn't be more delighted to have this chance to have this conversation. When we start to think about the future of submarine warfare, and really we're talking about the future of undersea warfare, this is more than just submarines. I start with the future of the Navy, right, and how we implement the Navy's design for maritime superiority. And so I want to acknowledge up front that we are part of a larger fleet. We will bring unique advantages to bear on behalf of that fleet to help it. And there's other pieces of the Navy, of course, that also have unique advantages. And together as a fleet, we will go off and accomplish missions. So that's sort of step one. If we could go to the next slide. And I did bring some slides. I have to apologize just a little bit. I'm a Pentagon guy. And so I don't go anywhere seemingly unable to communicate without a couple of slides. You come home from work in the afternoon, wife says, well, how did it go today? And you go, well, I have a couple of slides on that here. But I have a couple of slides. I think Michael has some too. When we want to start talking about undersea warfare, that begins with a discussion of strategic deterrence. And so I have a couple of quotes and a graph I wanted to show you. Strategic deterrence is fundamental to our survival as a nation. That is why it is the Navy and the undersea forces' #1 priority. And we act on that priority in the decisions that we make over inside the building. What you see up there are the numbers of submarines we have used over time to execute this mission. It is not new to us. We have been doing this for many decades. I am very proud to say that we have conducted over 4,000 strategic deterrent patrols successfully. And this is on the list of things that I worry as a nation that we take for granted, the benefits we have achieved from both our peace and the broader efforts of the forces and people operating the strategic triad. We have had over 70 years of nuclear non-use on the planet. We have had over 70 years of no major power war, and I submit that this capability is key to why that is something that we have enjoyed. A couple of key points, we can talk about this more later. It makes me proud to be an American that we design a ship, the Ohio's, to last for 30 years, and we give you 42 out of it, right? What a compliment to the people that designed it, built it, operated it, and maintained it through that period of time, that we could add that much more value to what we got for our investment. But the message here is that can no longer be extended any further. I have the man to my left who is responsible for making those decisions, and there's no margin left. The Ohio replacement has to be on patrol by 2031, and we are laser focused in providing the resources, focus, and leadership to make sure that that happens. You'll see the number 12 out there. I think, again, you see what we have been able to do in efficiency in accomplishing this mission, going from 41 for freedom now down to 12, in large part due to some superior technical innovation on the part of this nation. We can go no lower than that, right? That is the minimum that we need. That number comes from factors of geography, survivability, and the realities of the target base that we have to cover. And it is at the point that it is independent of the number of warheads and missiles that you need to accomplish the mission. Submarines are very stealthy, but they do not have Romulan cloaking devices. You have to operate them correctly, and you have to operate the force correctly, and that requires sufficient numbers to accomplish that mission. Next slide, please. What I show on the left here, and these slides come from the Force Commander, Vice Admiral Joe Tefalo, Sublance Sub 4 down in Norfolk. This is his guidance to his force. This is his vision for all of us. And you see down the left, what are these advantages that we provide in the undersea domain? Because of the physics of our domain that we operate in and the superior technology and operational skills we've developed over many years, we provide stealth. Stealth gives us access. Pretty much anywhere we need to go in the world, in the maritime domain, we can get there, right? We provide that to the broader Navy. And from that access, we can get through your defense in pretty much every credible scenario you want to come up with today. And we will do it without you knowing about it. That will give us surprise. That's going to give us, and it will insert ambiguity and uncertainty on the part of a potential competitor. We will be survivable as a result of that stealth, and we can do it undetected, which means the observer will not distort the experiment when we go in and something that we want to go look at. But we are platform-centric today, right? Not completely, but we tend to be centered on the submarine, and you see some of the effects that we can do today. They're very good. We're actually pretty good at it. But we ask ourselves the question, what more can we do with the access that we have? Next slide. And this is the vision. Moving to a domain-centric operations undersea, a system of systems approach on how we will, one, provide superiority undersea over a potential competitor, as well as providing effects from the undersea. I'm pleased to say that the man to my left is responsible for delivering most of the things I'm going to mention here. Everything you see on that slide, we either have going into the fleet, is in the fleet, or we're pretty far along in efforts to bring it into the fleet, right? So using Admiral Tefalo's vision, we want the boat to grow longer arms, longer fields of regard, longer fields of influence. We are partnered with our surface brothers and sisters in terms of getting back into the anti-ship cruise missile business, and we have other missile work beyond that. Pretty exciting. Torpedoes. I'm pleased to report this nation is back in the business of building heavyweight torpedoes. It's been since 1996 that we have done that, and that's a good thing because we're about 30% short, and we need to get on that. On top of that, we've got some pretty exciting prototype work with torpedoes, much greater range, much greater navigation control and other capabilities that I'm pleased to see the nation has made an investment in, and I'm excited about what that's going to produce for us. Unmanned systems, right? We are at all-ahead flank, both on unmanned aerial and unmanned undersea vehicle. They are in the fleet now. We're doing real-world missions with them. I can't go into much more detail than that. And in the President's budget, many more of those are on the way. So 3-inch unmanned aerial systems, torpedo tube-launched unmanned aerial systems, 21-inch torpedo tube-launched UUVs, and we're working with a number of partners over on the Pentagon in terms of bringing the larger LD, large diameter, and XL, extra large diameter UUVs into the fleet. And everything else you see on that slide, we have work going on. Next slide. But we're not going to stop there. The question we ask ourselves is, what more should we do? So while we are maintaining our advantages in traditional areas, think the acoustic spectrum competition, and I'm particularly pleased with the potential of the Acoustic Superiority program for us to be able to maintain the competitive advantage we have enjoyed for many years over potential adversaries. We're also looking at new areas of competition. Electromagnetic maneuver warfare is a particular one we're putting a lot of attention to and have some work going on. Competition on the seabed, sea floor, unmanned, as I just alluded to, and finally, spectrum of effects, right? What do I have that I can offer an operational commander somewhere between boss, you want a picture, and boss, you want me to blow it to smithereens, right? I think those capabilities will be valuable in the competitions we're going to be in the future. So at this point, let me turn it over to my good friend, Michael Jabaley, who is, I just say what we think we need and write checks. Admiral Jabaley has the very hard work of actually producing the stuff and getting into the fleet. Sir.
Thank you, Chaz. And let me echo his thanks for the sponsors and how glad I am to be able to be here today. Next slide, please. So the title of this dialogue is Delivering on the Vision for the Future of Undersea Warfare. So Chaz is the vision and I'm the deliverer. And what we're working on right now, I'm going to start with the platforms. Chaz talked about the need for a strong sea-based strategic deterrent, and the Ohio replacement SSBN is going to give us exactly that. So if you look at these slides, and there's some swim lanes on here, for the most part, the Ohio replacement SSBN is the Virginia-class submarine either adopted wholesale or scaled up in order to support the larger hull. Obviously, then there is a common missile compartment inserted into the middle of it. And then what you have on the slide here are the things that are not pulled through from the Virginia. So for instance, the integrated tube and hull construction, how we build the missile tubes for the Ohio replacement, that is also different than how we did them on the Ohio class SSBN. So this will give us a significant advantage in the production efficiency of the SSBN. The next swim lane over, you have what is necessary for survivability and stealth. We have, for years, made significant improvements in the quieting of our main machinery gear, the turbines, the reduction gears, and for the main engines that turn the propulsor. For Ohio replacement, we have taken a leap forward and gone away from steam-driven main engines to an electric drive system. That is a significant advance, and it promises real improvement in acoustic stealth. The coordinated stern is similarly a significant advance in acoustic stealth. It includes two significant aspects. First, we're going away from a cruciform stern into an X-plane stern that you see depicted in the picture there. And then the second part is that it is designed as a holistic process with the propulsor, the control surfaces, and the stern itself, which is different from the way we used to do it, where we had two different design teams working on the motive force of the propeller or then later the propulsor, and then a different design team working on the control surfaces. So now this is all coordinated in one package that provides, again, a significant advantage in acoustic stealth. Approved availability from the platform. Primarily, this is a 42-year life of the ship reactor core that our partners at Naval Reactors have developed. And that is a significant advantage in terms of the amount of time the ship will have to spend in maintenance. Removing the refueling aspect of the midlife overhaul saves about a year to 2 years off of the maintenance requirement. The strategic weapon systems that our partners at SSP will continue to support. We are adopting wholesale the Trident D5 life extension missile on this platform. But the platform will go beyond that. So at some point in midlife of the ship, a new strategic missile will be fielded and incorporated on the Ohio replacement. And then finally, our partnership with the UK. The common missile compartment is a common design. The only difference is that ours is 16 tubes and the UK's is 12 tubes. But that design is in progress and going very well. So where are we on the Ohio replacement? This year we transitioned from research and development, R&D funded design to the detailed design. The contract will be awarded later this year. The request for proposals went out in early January of this year. We have the proposal from Electric Boat and are reviewing it and beginning the negotiation process with our contractor. We are on track. The FY 17 budget is the first year that has SCN funded design in it. So shipbuilding and conversion Navy funding as opposed to RDT&E Navy funding. So that's a big step for us. And then in 2 years, we'll begin the advanced procurement funding in 19 for the construction of the first ship starting in 21. Next slide. We are, of course, continuing to produce Virginia-class submarines at 2 per year. This is a placemat that shows the history of the Virginia program. Blocks 1 and 2 were focused on getting Electric Boat and Newport News back into the business of building and delivering attack submarines. And we really focused on an improved construction plan going from 10 modules to 4 super modules, which allowed a significant reduction in the time required to deliver the ships. Block 3 was our 2 for 4 and 12 block. That's what got us to 2 ships per year as we embarked on an aggressive cost reduction program to get the cost down to $4 billion for 2 ships as measured in fiscal year 05 dollars. Block 4 was focused on total ownership cost with the maintenance that has to be done to the ship over its life. And in doing so, our goal was to increase the number of decrease the number of availabilities from 4 down to 3, and increase the number of deployments from 14 up to 15. So the 315 moniker for that was very successful. Those design changes have been laid in, and starting with SSN 792, we expect to deliver ships that will deploy 15 times over their life and only have 3 depot level availabilities. So that brings us to Block 5 and later. Block 5 is focused on recapitalizing the strike capacity that we lose when our 4 SSGNs decommission in the mid-2020s. In doing so, we increase from 12 Tomahawk missiles per ship to 40. We do that by adding 4 Virginia payload tubes in a new section after the sail, and each of those tubes can hold 7 Tomahawk missiles. So when you combine that with the 12 missiles in the bow, in the 2 Virginia payload tubes there, you get 40. That increase in strike capacity starts to replace what we lose when the SSGNs go away. We start that with SSN 803, the second ship in 19, and the current plan is for every subsequent Virginia through the end of the program to be a VPM ship. So eventually we won't talk about Virginia with VPM as we roll them off the production line, because it'll just be the new norm. And so that, again, per the current program, 19 ships with VPM will go a significant way. It'll replace all but about 15% of the strike capacity that we lose with the retirement of the SSGNs. Next slide, please. Chaz mentioned acoustic superiority. This is our response to the continued improvement in our peer competitors' submarine quality. The Russians, with the production of the Severodvinsk SSGN, took a significant step forward in their acoustic ability. We want to maintain pace ahead of that. We never want to reach acoustic parity. We always want to be better than anything any other country is putting out there in the submarine domain. So our acoustic superiority program begins with USS South Dakota, and that is our test ship, SSN 790. So in 2018, she will have been delivered. She'll go back into PSA, and she'll get an enhanced hull coating. She will also get large vertical arrays, one on each side, that provide a significant advantage in the ability to detect other submarines before you yourself are in a position to be detected. And then there are a series of machinery improvements internal to the ship, selected components, where as we get quieter and quieter, you find some things that remain above the overall noise level. So we go and target those, and that provides a huge return on investment because it removes that noise spike in that one particular area. So many of those machinery improvements have already been fielded on some ships. South Dakota will be the first to have the entire package, and that she will then be our acoustic superiority test ship. The lessons we will learn from her will then drive what we install on future ships, including Ohio replacement, and what we backfit on existing Virginias. The final part of this is the propulsor. South Dakota will have an improved advanced hybrid propulsor that we've developed with DARPA. And again, it promises to present a significant acoustic advantage. Next slide, please. So overall shipbuilding, if you look at this chart, and what it does is it lines up the Virginia construction on the first two lines. The third line is our future SSN that starts in the mid-30s, and then the SSBN, the Ohio replacement, on the bottom. So the way it's designed right now, we are building 2 submarines every year for the foreseeable future. The things to note in here, as I said, that second ship in 2019 will be the first one with the Virginia Payload Module, and then everything after that will be a VPM. The other thing to note is, although we are not providing the force structure for attack submarines right now that the combatant commanders need, let me pause and expand on that. In testimony this year, both Admiral Harry Harris at PACOM and General Philip Breedlove, Air Force at UCOM, both testified that they were not getting enough attack submarines to do all the missions that they needed to do. It is recognized that our force structure, which is right now about 53 attack submarines, cannot provide all the mission coverage that the combatant commanders are asking for around the globe. Now recognize that 53 attack submarine force structure will decline below the floor of 48. Our requirement is 48 attack submarines. And we reach a minimum of about 40 to 41 in the late 20s, early 30s before we start climbing back out of that. This is nothing that we can fix at this point. It's the result of decisions made long ago and of the buildup during the Cold War. We were building as many as 6 submarines a year during the 70s and 80s, and those submarines are now reaching the end of their life and will be retired. We're building all the Virginias that we can right now in the budget environment, but at 2 per year, you're obviously you're not maintaining inventory. So the question becomes, now you're going down to 1 per year in the year that you build Ohio replacements, and that is very undesirable, but it is what the program of record is right now. Now, earlier this year, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Secretary Stackley, testified before Congress and made the point that 2 things. Number one, we have to control cost on Ohio replacement. We recognize that it is a big bill, and that if left unchecked, it prevents you from building a lot of the ships that the Navy needs to build. So we have to control cost. But beyond that, we have to look for every opportunity to reduce cost. And we're doing that in 2 significant ways. With an eye towards providing ourselves the budgetary flexibility to change some of those 1s in the attack submarine row back to 2s. So if you look at the 2021 column, 1 Virginia, 1 Ohio replacement, that's an incredibly important year because a ship authorized in 21 will deliver about 5 years later in 2026. And that is right as we start to go below 48 SSNs and enter that period of the trough. So a second ship delivered in 21 will fill in every year of that trough by 1 additional submarine. So it's an extremely valuable ship from a force structure perspective. So next slide, please. So what are we doing? I said we're going to do 2 things to try to make this happen. The first thing is we're looking at a submarine unified build strategy. And this is a holistic effort to do everything we can during the period that we're building Ohio replacements and Virginia-class submarines, to leverage every opportunity for cost efficiency and savings as we build them together. An example is a chill water pump on a Virginia-class submarine is the same as a chill water pump on the Ohio replacement submarine. Left unchecked, we would have two separate programs working with the contractor to provide two separate orders for those chill water pumps, and there might be volume savings somewhere, but there's no assurance that the Navy would get a part of that. We need to get a part of that because we need to control cost and even reduce cost to give ourselves the budgetary flexibility to continue building all the other ships the Navy needs. So our unified build strategy focuses on the priorities listed on this slide and uses innovative acquisition, contracting, and legislative authorities to provide the cost efficiency that we need to reduce the cost of both programs. And in doing so, Secretary Sackley said we've got to do this in order to give ourselves the opportunity to continue building Virginia-class submarines at 2 per year. In particular, that 2021 ship is the most important. So we have developed teams and lines of effort to attack each of several opportunities for a unified build between the Virginia-class and the Ohio replacement class. We have even started working with our partners in the aircraft carrier program to explore opportunities. Obviously, aircraft carriers built by Huntington Ingalls, Newport News, they also play a role in procurement of the Virginia submarines. So common material, common components between all three programs present an opportunity for savings. And that is our prime focus this year as we develop the integrated enterprise plan for nuclear shipbuilding construction. I think at this point, I'll stop with my remarks and turn it back over to Dr. Hicks.
Sure, great. Thank you both. That's a very helpful summary of where you're trying to go and the detail, as you say, the vision and the delivery for the submarine force. I want to start with an issue that's been very lively, to say the least, over the course of at least the last year, which is the cost of Ohio. But more broadly, I'd like to broaden that out to how you react to the view that many Americans have trouble thinking about the dollar signs involved in recapitalizing the U.S. nuclear deterrent. And so often you'll hear thrown out, for instance, this, I think it's $1 trillion over 10 years, I think is the dollar figure you'll often hear. So maybe if I can turn first to Admiral Richard, welcome your thoughts on what you think Americans should think about in terms of that investment and whether that's a cost that's worth paying.
Yes, ma'am. Hey, Ward, let's go back to the first slide from my piece, right? Ma'am, I think it's important, one, to start with the context of your question. I think Michael has really, in a lot of detail, described the efforts that are going into making sure that the costs are kept to an absolute minimum on Ohio replacement and that we're producing best value. And I can't think of a program right now that is getting as much attention in terms of the question that you just asked between both OPNAV, CNO, and the Secretariat and Secretary Sackley in terms of making sure we accomplish that. But let's back up a little bit. And if you look here, the nation has faced this decision on recapitalizing, in this case, the undersea portion of the triad, 2 other times in its history. This is an every other generation responsibility to make this investment. And in both of these previous times, the debate was very similar to the one that we're talking about now in terms of cost versus capability and strategy. And in both of those cases, the nation wisely chose to recapitalize its strategic deterrent. And in many cases, like on the decision to do Ohio, we got far more out of that investment than we originally planned. In both of these cases, the Department of the Navy received additional resourcing in the SCN accounts to ensure that in recapitalizing the strategic deterrent, we didn't do undue damage to the remainder of the Navy shipbuilding program. In both cases, this was total cost for the naval leg is just under 1% of DoD's budget, and we're faced with a very similar decision again this time. And so, one, I'd like to see that debate in terms of, and I get back to things I worry we take for granted in terms of what we got out of that investment. 70 years of nuclear non-use, 70 years of no major power war, and a change in the way major powers relate to each other. This time around, to put numbers on top of it, so we are talking approximately $100 billion, right, in the acquisition cost for the Ohio replacement over 15 years. And placed in context to all of the other things that this nation chooses to spend its money on, that is a very small percentage. So this becomes a debate on priorities. And given that this is the only existential threat this nation faces and our only mechanism to defend against that, I think this is a very wise investment of our national resources.
Admiral and Jabaley, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to add, again, Chaz does a great job of framing the high-level view of it. I'm more involved in the nuts and bolts of it. So cost. The other thing that we're doing this year is proceeding to milestone B decision. So the, excuse me, our later this summer, we'll go before OSD, Frank Kendall, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, will chair a Defense Acquisition Board to grant us Milestone B approval authority. And that, coincident with that, we're also producing a new cost estimate. I'm constrained in what I can say about that cost estimate because it's still working its way through the Navy approval, and then the Navy has to derive what's called a component cost position, which is the numbers that we present to the Milestone B decision. So the numbers I'm going to talk about are based on our 2014 estimate, which is the most recent estimate that's been approved. And please don't ask me, well, how's the Milestone B estimate looking? Because I can't talk about it. But the milestone, or the 2014 estimate, really looking at a couple of areas. One is the NRE, the non-recurring engineering. So that's the money that it takes to design the submarine and to facilitize the yards for building this new class of submarine. So that 2014 estimate in 2000 or in then-year dollars was $17.4 billion. And that is in line for what we had said all along, going back to Milestone A, and it is what it costs to build a new class of submarine. The other thing that we really focus on is what's called the average follow ship cost. So the lead ship is always different, but hulls 2 through 12, we have a key cost parameter, which is in our requirement documentation. Mostly, you usually have physical requirements. It has to be able to go this fast, this deep, carry this many missiles, be this percentage of availability. We were one of the first programs to have a key cost parameter. It can cost no more than X. And for those, for that parameter, the average follow ship cost, we had both a threshold and an objective. The threshold, which we have to meet, is it can be no more than $5.6 billion, and that's in fiscal year $10. And then the objective was we had to get it down to less than $4.9 billion, which is what we're working very hard to do. So the 2014 cost estimate, $5.2 billion. Again, fiscal year $10, but 5.2 already meets the threshold of 5.6 and is working very well towards the objective of 4.9. Those numbers will be refreshed and publicly released upon the Milestone B decision authority approval memo being signed. So again, I go back to what I said before. Number one, from a, and I'll add one thing I didn't say before, but number one, I'm a taxpayer too. So I want us to be as good a steward of the taxpayers' dollars as we can. Number two, I'm not parochial. I'm a naval officer. We need other ships beyond submarines. If I can't control cost on the Ohio replacement program, we can't build as many surface ships and attack submarines as we would want. Number three, that's the reason we've gone to this unified build strategy, to find every opportunity for cost savings so I can not only control the cost of the SSBN, but reduce it to allow us to build the rest of the fleet that the Navy needs. And as discussed, one of those most important ships is that 2nd Virginia in 2021.
Right, and just to stay with you for a moment, you also, talked quite well about the acoustic superiority emphasis that obviously the Navy is thinking through. I wonder if you can talk a little bit, understanding there would be some restrictions on what you could say about other challenges out there for the submarine force in the tech arena or maybe in the operational concept arena that beyond the acoustic piece that are really drivers for how you are thinking about the future of the undersea force?
Sure. I'm going to quickly throw it to Chaz, okay, because we maintain a very active program to ensure the security of our submarines. It's been a big part of our success over decades. The program actually works for Chaz, so I'm going to let him talk about it. But from a technical standpoint, I will say that there's been a lot of discussion about making the oceans transparent. We're not there yet. We're not really close. We're working on that just as hard as or harder than anyone else is, and we're not there yet. But I will say that long before anyone gets there, Chaz's program will have a good idea of what's feasible and what we need to do to mitigate it. So.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And Michael's referring to the Submarine Security Technology Program. That's for ballistic missile submarines. There's an equivalent for attack submarines. SSTP's been around for a long time, right? My first shore job 30 years ago was in that same program. So it looks out into the future, as far as 25 or 30 years, based on the physics, so it's physics-based, intel-informed, how could someone potentially attempt to detect a submarine, and then if we see something feasible, we start working on what we're going to do to counter that. And so not a new program, and it's been very successful for us for ensuring the security of ballistic missile as well as other submarines. To go back and pick up on what Michael talked about, the idea that the oceans are going transparent is not new, right? So it seems like every 5 or 10 years, there is a type of technology comes out that offers to be the next great thing and that we're going to be able to turn the oceans transparent. The physics undersea are brutal. Electromagnetic energy does not propagate very far, and you're not going to be able to change that. Acoustic energy does, but it gets distorted. Those challenges haven't changed, and whether it was satellites in the 80s or whether it's robots, UUVs, and big data in this century, those challenges all remain. So we're pretty confident that at the same time we're looking for it so that we can exploit, right? We're also in the business of ASW or finding submarines. We're also confident that we understand it to the point that we are still able to hide and maintain our stealth. You asked about technology challenges. Maintaining your advantage in the acoustic spectrum is one we've talked a little bit about. I'll offer you another one, which is, as you think through where we're going in competitions in electromagnetic spectrum, what we're working very hard on is how do undersea platforms interface into the electromagnetic spectrum while still maintaining the stealth that is required, right? So how do you ensure that any electromagnetic emission you make doesn't wind up compromising your stealth to a point that you can't tolerate it, or even getting the aperture out of the water so that you can do that carries a penalty. We're working very hard in those areas, ma'am.
Right. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience. And we've covered tech, we've covered cost, and the other thing I think we should cover is size of the force. And the attack submarine force, as Admiral Jabaley pointed out, has been, COCOMs have craved more submarines than they can get. You've shown, I think, very well what the build plan is. I don't anticipate resources changing so fundamentally that picture would hugely change. So if we can put that idea off the table for the moment, how are you helping the Navy manage the challenge set of working at a minimum the attack submarine force in the Pacific, in the Middle East, both of which were sort of anticipated, if you will, strategically by the department, and now with regard to Russia and Europe?
Let me start with that. So we have talked about what that profile is going to look like, a requirement of 48. We will go below the requirement in 2025, minimum in, as Michael said, 41 boats in 2029 before we start to dig back up. That requirement itself is based on 10-year-old analysis. It was last done in 2006. If you were to go look at the underpinnings underneath that, the assumptions that were made, a number of them have changed in the last decade, including our relationship with Russia, the guided missile submarines going away. We're in a world now where we have multiple countries operating ballistic missile submarines that have potential ability to directly threaten the homeland. Beyond what Michael talked about in terms of the day-to-day combatant command war. So a number of those have changed. CNO, in some of his testimony, talked about betting a paycheck in terms of he has directed a new force structure assessment to be conducted. OPNAV is in the process of doing that. We're contributing to it. And he bet a paycheck in terms of it's probably going to drive the number up. I'm not in the business of predicting Super Bowls, operational reactor safeguards exams, or what my boss is going to do. I also think it's going to go up. So that makes the, for example, 2nd Virginia in 21 even more important. That single ship paints about 30% of that trough in terms of submarine years. Beyond that, we will be very aggressive at pulling every lever available to us to ensure that we can provide adequate attack submarine capability. So many thanks to Michael, we may have underemphasized the brilliant success that the Virginia program is in terms of every ship coming in under budget, faster than the one before it at a higher level of quality. That directly contributes to submarines available to go do missions. We will look at every single boat as it approaches its decommissioning to see, do we have any engineering margin left for life cycle? Can I get a few more months out of this to put capability in the hands of the combatant commanders? And then we will look at things like selective extensions of deployments, right? And use every lever available to us to provide that capability out in the fleet as we ride through that trough.
Can I just ask, does that include looking at forward stationing options?
Well, we do that. For example, last year we moved a 4th attack submarine out to Guam, and we will look at other options like that where it makes sense, right? With the rigor you would expect from us as we think through that.
I'd like to add one thing. So Chaz touched on the 3 mitigating steps that this force structure problem, the 3 mitigating steps that were developed to address it. Selected extension of deployments beyond 6 months, selected life extensions of 688 class submarines as they reach the end of their life, and then a reduction in the Virginia class build span. So the USS Virginia was delivered in 86 months, so just over 7 years. We have improved that over time such that USS Mississippi, which is the 9th submarine of the class, was delivered in 62 months, which was a full year ahead of contract requirement and 2 years shorter than the time it took to build the lead ship of the class. Lead ships are hard, but the learning curve is clearly outstanding. We're working very hard to maintain and improve that pace. We are the Block 3 submarines are principally contracted for 66 months delivery. The Block 4 submarines, the first 3 are contracted for 62 months, and then the remainder is contracted for 60. And we're working very hard with the shipbuilder to figure out how to get below 60 months to deliver those, in less than 5 years. However, if you look at those mitigating steps, they're primarily focused on the current force and in terms of presence. Extending a deployment keeps a submarine on station and away from home port and in the area where it matters to us longer. But it doesn't give you an extra submarine in the barn to surge when there's a crisis. We're delivering submarines in a shorter amount of time, but the force structure is still the same. Extending a submarine for 3 or 4 months might help in a crisis if it exactly happens at the right time, but primarily it's trying to get one more presence deployment out of it. So the difference between presence and power projection is one that's worth noting when you're talking about force structure. And for power projection, really the only thing we can do is build more submarines, not build them faster, keep them around for a month or two longer, or deploy them longer.
Okay, great. I want to open it up to the audience. We have microphones that will come around, and when I call on you, please give your name, your affiliation, a question meaning one, and it has to end with a question mark in the tone. So why don't we begin right here?
Mel Lyman from the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins. You address putting missile tubes on Virginia, but you did not address for the SSGN replacement, but you did not address anything about special warfare. Is there going to be space on a Virginia compared to the 4 Ohios for SEALs?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the work that Hopkins does in supporting our enterprise. So the Virginia payload module was narrowly constrained to strike capacity alone. Now, having said that, a Virginia with Virginia payload module has the same Special Operations Forces capability than every other Virginia does. It has the ability to carry a dry deck shelter. It has a lockout trunk for mass swimmer lockout capability, and it has, it was designed with ASDS capability, but we don't have the ASDS anymore. The principal difference between a Virginia and an SSGN is the SSGN has the capability to carry a second dry deck shelter, and the SSGN has more room for habitability for an embarked SEAL team. We can't replace that with a Virginia. There has been discussion at times of a new Virginia variant dedicated to Special Operations Forces. We continue to have those discussions. We continue to explore concepts, but there's nothing in the program of record right now to replace the dual dry deck shelter enhanced soft capability that an SSGN brings. And that's purely a budgetary constraint.
Okay, and we'll go right up front here.
Peter Humphrey, Intel analyst and former diplomat. I note that cetacean mortality will always stand as a barrier to full transparency in the ocean. My question is, when you look in the far future, way down the highway, next gen kind of stuff, is anybody seriously looking at titanium hulls and adding multi-functionality, not just to the torpedo tubes, but to the missile tubes as well?
Well, I think the short answer to your question is yes, right? That we are looking hard in terms of concepts for the next attack submarine. And so between operational concepts, technologies, and we're trying very hard to have nearly limitless thinking in terms of what is possible undersea, while at the same time making sure that we apply the rigor, right? We're all sort of sons of Rick over here in terms of having the rigor that when we think our way through this, we come to analytically solid conclusions. So the short answer to your question is yes, sir.
Okay, great. And let's go right next to you, Adam. Yep, right down.
Thanks. Admiral, thank you for your comments today. I'm Matthew Cosner. I'm a submariner, currently on shore duty at the Department of Energy. I was interested if you care to share any thoughts on, given the rising sea temperature and shrinking amount of ice in the Arctic, are there some ideas you had about what a future naval undersea and surface, how things look up in the Arctic compared to today?
Well, let me take that on. So the submarine force has never left the Arctic, right? And in fact, we are one of the lead elements in the U.S. Navy in our understanding of the dynamics that you just mentioned, right? So we just finished up earlier this year, ISEC 16, continuing in a series of exercises we have done for many decades involving, in this case, 2 attack submarines doing technical development, making sure that we have the abilities, we still understand how to operate in the Arctic, and then get an idea of how the conditions are changing up there, and they are. And so Arctic capability is still something that we prize, that we invest in, and we invest the operational availability to ensure we know how to operate up there.
Very good. Senator Warner, I'm sorry, right here.
Sneak in a couple of questions here. We're watching a whole new dimension of threat in cybersecurity. Given the very important constraints on classifications, you can go and tell us so much, but I do hope that you're fully aware of the ever-growing potential of this threat and the complexity of it as it relates to the highly technical systems that we're operating at sea. Other question is, it's been my observation through many, many years that the individual that qualifies to go aboard a submarine, now men and women, it requires a huge dedication, more so than I think than anyone else, and particularly family participation in that lifestyle. And lastly, the principal recruiting effort in my generation, which goes back a long way, was submariners were, in World War II, promised that they'd get ice cream 3 times a week. Is that still in the pipeline?
All right, you want to do cyber first?
Why don't you do ice cream first, Judge?
Well, so we do ice cream, right, in fact, every day. And I think just one other, submariners are used to not taking the short showers, right? In a world on a submarine with a reverse osmosis plant, we can make more water than we can use now, and you can take as many showers as you want. So it's ice cream and showers are part of the recruiting piece right now. And I'll let Michael get into some of the technical details, but we are very engaged in cyber defense, to more directly go after your question. But when I talk about electromagnetic spectrum, I include cyber, right? It is either radiated out an antenna, it's bounded in a Cat5 cable or a fiber. We're thinking through how we operate in that environment, which has a defensive component, but it also could have an offensive component to it. So we're very much engaged with that.
So let me just add one thing on the ice cream first. So in the Navy material reporting system called the CASREP, there's a C1, which is a nuisance, C2, which is a problem, C3 means I can't do part of my mission, C4 means I need to come back into port. As commanding officer, the only time I even considered writing a C4 was when the soft serve ice cream machine went down. So it occupies a position of high concern on board submarines. Cyber. Okay, so I look at cyber in 3 realms, really. The first, and I see a lot of faces that work for our contractors, and they can tell you how vigorous we are on this. The first is the protection that a contractor has to ensure is resident in their IT systems as they're holding the keys to the kingdom. You know, the design, the maintenance standards, the specifics on programs within the contractor, and then the government, of course, does the same for our IT systems. But you know, the Department of Defense has a litany of instances where the latest stealth fighter that China rolls out looks an awful lot like one of our stealth fighters. My goal as PEO Submarines is to never see any other country roll out what looks like to be a knockoff of one of our submarines or one of the systems on our submarines. And that has to go all the way back to the design and the production and our partnership with the contractors in protecting that information. The second part is the systems inherent to the platform and adjunct systems themselves. How do you protect from a cybersecurity standpoint, everything that goes on the submarine, everything that communicates off the submarine, and where we connect to the global information gig? How are we ensuring that we protect the information on board? That is a rapidly developing field of study, and we're doing everything we can to stay ahead of it as that happens. But you know, every couple of months, something new emerges as a threat on the horizon, and we have to make sure that our systems are able to be protected in the face of that threat, and we work very hard on that. The third thing which Chaz alluded to is there is an offensive capability that we prize very highly. And this is where I really can't talk about much, but suffice to say that we have submarines out on the front lines that are very involved at the highest technical level with doing exactly the kind of things that you would want them to do. As far as the family piece that you mentioned, I absolutely agree with you. And let me just say, by the way, thank you for being here today. And your ship is doing well. It'll finish PSA in a month or two and be back out and ready to deploy. But the remarks that you made at the christening ceremony, really, and the commissioning ceremony as well, really struck home because the team can't do its work if it's concerned about what's going on the home front. And the family plays such an important role, and we play such an important role in supporting the family. So that is very close to our hearts and well known, and we strive to do that. I don't know if you wanted to touch on recruiting, and you mentioned gender integration as well.
Well, what I'll offer, sir, is one, you would be, and are, I'm sure, equally proud of this generation of submariners that we're bringing in, men and women, right, as you would be from the previous ones. I'll tell you that the current generation is smarter than my generation, and I'll tell you they're 10 times better behaved, right? So we are doing well in the recruiting front. Integration of women is going very well. In fact, your ship was selected to add an additional crew of women officers to open up the number of home ports that we have available for dual military. We're also in the process of integrating enlisted women on submarines. That is underway on USS Michigan right now. Chief Petty Officers are already there, and the rest of the enlisted cohort arrives this summer. And when it comes to any aspect of diversity that you would like to lay on the table, what I'll offer is submarining is a very cerebral enterprise, right? It requires a lot of thought. It is one of the few warfare areas where the entire battle space is remotely sensed, and it has to, in effect, be fought in your brain. I have not had to do very much running around with 80-pound backpacks on like my brothers and sisters in other services. At the risk of a small short story, I was so old, I was there when the first physical readiness tests came into the Navy, and it involves running a mile and a half. I remember talking to my sonar technicians, and they're telling me, sir, the ship's only about 200 feet long on the inside. Why do we even have to run, right? My point is, we will not leave any piece or aspect of this nation's population unavailable to us to obtain talent for what we need to be competitive in the environment that we see. And I'm very proud of the leadership of the Navy of ensuring that we can provide that opportunity to our entire population, because we're going to need it to have the talent and mental horsepower it's going to take to compete in the future.
We have reached time, and I want to be respectful of your time and all the work you have left to do, I'm sure, back at your desks at the Pentagon. I want to thank you both, Rear Admiral Jabaley and to Rear Admiral Richard, for taking the time to talk to us this morning about undersea warfare in the Navy. We wish you the best luck, and we thank you for your service to the nation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.